ロロノアゾロ
覚えておく。久しく見ぬ強き者よ。
Just a few arcs into the story, Zoro got a chance at accomplishing his dream, and goddamn did he get fucked. But 1,000 chapters later, he's gotten a little stronger. So the question is, what if the current Zoro somehow lost his way back in time to the Baratie arc? Is he strong enough to take on the challenge against Mihawk now? And if not, just how close is he? Let's get right into this conversation because it's gonna be a fun one. To start things off, just like I do with other what-if scenarios, we're gonna set some ground rules. And really the only thing I want to establish is that Zoro is only going back with his current strength, which means physically and mentally he's gonna be just as strong as he is now in the manga. But information and personality wise, he's still gonna be the exact same person he was at Baratie. And that's really the only rule that I have. And the reason I do that is because the current Zoro knows the plot of the story. So if he goes back to Baratie knowing everything, it's a little too broken. And as a sneak peek for later in the video, if his current self goes back knowing everything that he does, he might not even challenge Mihawk. In this scenario, we're gonna ensure that he does. So the first discussion surrounds the current power of Zoro. And this is an interesting topic in debate because on one hand, Zoro's an incredibly popular character with a dream that is literally defined by strength. So power scaling Zoro can be a bit harder to do because some people act too much on emotion, and also it's such a long story it can be easy to miss details. Despite that though, I think from what we've seen from Zoro in the story, we have a pretty clear understanding of how strong he currently is. You see, when it comes to power scaling, there are two main things that people really look at. First off, you have feats, which are things that characters actually have done in the story. And second, you have narrative, something I value a lot when it comes to power scaling because it's the portrayal of the character's strength in comparison to others and also just their overall role in the story and what they're going to become. And in a well-written, consistent story, feats and narrative should really work together to tell us how strong a person is, and I think for Zoro it does. And we'll start off with Zoro's feats, which for the majority of post-time skip, we had very little to go off of, so it kept Zoro in this weird place where we really couldn't judge him. So before Wano happened, the only real feat that we could judge Zoro off of was his quick clash with Fujitora. And I think the main point of this scene was to show that the Straw Hats have grown and they can fight back against Admirals, and it's not Sabaody anymore. To make any claims beyond that, I think it's just speculation because we get so little out of that scene. But then we finally got to Wano, and here's where Zoro started to really shine. Because off rip, he's already fighting other supernovas. He has this quick clash with Hawkins and then gets a big fight with Killer. And this fight was a pretty telling moment because he was in this 2v1 situation on a bad stomach and he still pulled out the W. So to me, this was the first testament of Zoro's strength, where he showed that even amongst the other supernova, he's stronger than most of them, which narratively also makes sense because his goal is to become the world's strongest swordsman, which is a higher ambition than most of the supernova have besides the top three. But speaking of the top three, how does he stack up against Luffy, Law, and Kid? Well, first off, I think Luffy is out of the question, and that's clear. There have been moments where it's been emphasized that Zoro is also a monster that is right there with Luffy. So despite Zoro clearly being below Luffy, Oda has also made it clear that he's closely behind, and if it wasn't for Luffy, he wouldn't serve under anyone else. So while strength-wise, Luffy is definitely out of the question, especially after defeating Kaido, which certified him at Yonko level, Law and Kid versus Zoro is a pretty interesting question. If you want to make the argument that Law and Kid are stronger, you're gonna point out that they teamed up to take out a Yonko. Law is even fighting one right now with Blackbeard, which both of those things are huge feats. Narrative-wise, both of them continue to get showcased as Luffy's rival, even getting matching bounties to him after Wano. Meanwhile, Zoro's bounty barely crossed over 1 billion, so he's not really even close. So based off of that, you might think Kid and Law are stronger, but there's another side to this argument. Because first off, narrative-wise, Zoro's at a bit of an advantage because he's not on the same path as Luffy to try to become the Pirate King like these other two are. Instead, he's his right-hand man, so he's never gonna be portrayed as Luffy's rival. At the same time, in terms of goals, his goal is not only incredibly ambitious, but we also know as the audience he's gonna achieve it. Law and Kid, on the other hand, while they're being showcased as Luffy's rivals, Luffy's still gonna come out on top. And even currently in the story, it's clear that Luffy is a level above them just like he is to Zoro. So narrative-wise, I don't think Kid and Law have the advantage that people think they do, but this is where the feats come in because they're very telling. And specifically, I'm talking about Roof Piece, this amazing 5v2 of non-stop high-level action that involved Zoro, Kid, and Law. And during Roof Piece, I think there were a few strong but clear indications of how strong each person was portrayed and showcased to be. So let's break this down. To start things off, it's a bit of a back and forth, and all 5 of the Supernova show off that they have a way to damage Kaido, so they're showing that they belong there. But if we really focus in on the action, there are a few moments of acknowledgement in there from Supernova and Yonko. And honestly, all of it went to Zoro and Luffy. Luffy, of course, has the obvious ones. He comes right out with Ryo, which shocks Kaido so much he starts hallucinating his top 5. Then he goes on to just absolutely pummel Kaido, which has everyone just watching in awe. And then in the end, he learns Advanced Conquers Haki and just takes over the fight because Luffy is him. But besides Luffy, the other person to really get acknowledgement and feats is Zoro. First off, with just this initial attack, Zoro's the only person to actually straight up cut Kaido, doing external damage. So even that initial attack kind of stood out for Zoro. You even see Killer reacting. After that though, you have his next big attack, which ends up missing, but once again, he gets acknowledgement because Big Mom straight up tells Kaido to dodge. And then after that comes the real feats, which he starts off by tanking the double attack from Kaido and Big Mom, which Law is surprised he's even standing after that. But not only is he standing up after that, but he then busts out Ashura, goes 1v1 against Kaido, severely wounds him, and also gets revealed that he has Conqueror's Haki. And once again, this is another moment where he gets acknowledgement, not only from Kaido himself, but off to the side, Law is shook. Now, of course, when we take all of this and compare it to Luffy, it's still gonna be lacking because Luffy is that guy. But compared to Law and Kid, Zoro put in a lot more work during Roof Piece, and it was emphasized that he was the bigger threat. Of course, following that, Law and Kid do team up to defeat Big Mom, which even if it is a 2v1, it's still a major feat to take out a Yonko. They also got to showcase more of their strength with Devil Fruit Awakening as well. Meanwhile, Zoro only ends up defeating King, which is definitely not as impressive, but there were different circumstances. Because my guy was cracked out on painkillers, but still came out with the win, and also showed that he improved even more by showcasing Advanced Conquers Haki, which by the way is a skill that Kaido said himself brings you to the conversation of elite territory. So in terms of feats, even though in the end Zoro defeated the lesser opponents, I think in Roof Piece he showcased that he was more dangerous than Law and Kid, and also came out with an equally impressive, if not more, power up with Advanced Conquers Haki. So how strong is Zoro currently? Definitely not Yonko level, which Luffy has entered, but I would put him right below that and a slight edge above Law and Kid. And if you want to bring in outside comparison, I would say that's Admiral level. Now I'm sure after saying that, a lot of Admiral defenders are going to be up in arms, but listen, I am not your enemy. I've always supported the idea that the Admirals are in elite territory and are not far off from the Yonko, but throughout the entire story, it's always been very clear that the Yonko are above the Admirals, and it's even more clear now. During Marineford, Whitebeard got incredibly high portrayal, being seen as this one Yonko taking on the entire Marines. Even then, I was kind of defending the Admirals, saying that they barely broke a sweat, and the only person that did was Akainu, who put in work. But post-time skip, the Admirals have been struggling. They're barely making any moves. Sabo and a
few good men!
They were just able to take on 2 Admirals and escape Marijois. And then recently we just got the clearest indication where Green Bull pulls up and talks a bunch of shit, but then Shanks shows up and he just runs away. So trust me, I'm not trying to bag on the Admirals. I think eventually they'll get their time to shine, and they're still in that elite territory, but they are clearly still a level below the Yonko, which I think Zoro, Law, and Kid currently are. Now, can Zoro actually beat an Admiral? That I think we just don't have enough information to judge, so for right now, I'm just gonna call it extreme diff. But to me, I think it's very clear that Zoro is definitely on that level, and if you think differently, let me know why in the comments. But now that that's established, let's finally talk about this Mihawk rematch and how it's gonna play out. And well, as I hinted at earlier, I don't think Zoro is ready yet. It'll still be an incredibly fun fight scenario that we'll discuss soon, but as of right now, I think Mihawk is still a level higher because he is Yonko level. For a long time, that wasn't really clear because he barely did anything in the story. He was just nonchalantly sailing around and planting vegetables. But this man has the title of the world's strongest swordsman in the Great Pirate Era. And he was also known for having legendary duels with Shanks, which, if they were well known, clearly it was extreme diff and they were on the same level. But to really hammer things home, as of right now, he's practically a Yonko. Because recently the Cross Guild formed and Buggy became a Yonko in classic Buggy fashion. But the real reason he was able to become a Yonko is not because of him or even Crocodile, it's because of Mihawk. And to prove that, the world government gave him a bounty of 3.5 billion, which is higher than 2 actual Yonko. So for the Cross Guild, he's the muscle of the group that's actually enough of a threat for the world government to make Buggy a Yonko. So portrayal wise, I think it's as clear as ever that Mihawk is definitely Yonko level. And then feats wise, even though he hasn't done anything in the story, those legendary duels with Shanks matters. Because it doesn't matter whether or not you think Shanks is stronger or weaker, it still means that both of them were on the same level. And that is a level I don't think Zoro is quite ready for yet, but the fight is still going to be very interesting given the scenario. Just with observation haki alone, I think both of them will really feel a sense of how strong each of them are. So I think both sides will start the fight very seriously, which for Mihawk means that he's not busting out the bunny blade and he's gonna use Yoru. And for Zoro, even though he's still that naive kid from Baratie, he's gonna sense Mihawk's strength and know that he's gonna have to go all out. Now initially, while they will be using a lot of their strength, there's still gonna be a feel out process. But even with just that feel out process, I'm already excited thinking about the reactions to that. Because first off, Don Krieg was just such an asshat. The audacity of this man to pretend that Mihawk ran away from him. Every time I rewatch or reread that scene, I get so mad that Mihawk doesn't just deck him. Like, this man literally got bodied like it was child's play. But still, he was acting arrogant. So with this scenario, when he sees how strong Mihawk actually is, I think he might shit himself. Because it's kind of crazy if we think about it. This is some of the strongest power in the entire world that we're seeing in the East Blue. So right off the bat, the Krieg pirates are not going to be a threat. Don Krieg is probably going to fall to his knees, and Jin, as the reasonable one, is probably going to get him out of there. Meanwhile, I'm expecting hilarious reactions from Johnny and Yosaku, just in utter shock. Zeph's reaction, I think, will be really interesting as well, given that he's been to the Grand Line. He'll be someone that actually realizes the level of power they're witnessing. Maybe he even name drops some other Yonko just to compare. But the most interesting reactions to this fight are gonna be the Straw Hats. Because for Luffy, seeing this fight is gonna be an incredibly early wake-up call, something he doesn't get in the story until he meets Kuzan. And ironically, I think Zoro, as he is right now, is on the same level as Kuzan, and of course Mihawk is even higher. So how would this experience really shape Luffy? Does he get a lot stronger because of it? I think it's kind of complicated, because you might say he gets humbled right away, but at the same time, he's still such a young and reckless kid. Like, even after meeting Kuzan, he didn't stop his adventure to train to get stronger, and that ultimately led to his crew's demise as Sabaody. And it wasn't really until he lost a brother in Ace that he realized there's consequences to this. So although I think seeing this battle will make him understand that he's nowhere near strong enough, it's not gonna humble him to the point where he's gonna stop his adventure to train. At the same time though, after this battle, if Zoro survives, he will be a great resource for Luffy, because now Luffy can find out very early on what haki is, what conquers haki is, and although it's still gonna take him some time to learn all those skills, he at least has this knowledge now. At the same time though, what makes things kind of complicated is that Luffy's not gonna face as many challenges with current Zoro there. And it was really through all those battles that he got a lot stronger, got a lot of inspiration to get stronger attacks. But we'll get to that a little later. As far as other Straw Hat reactions, I think it's also going to be eye-opening for Sanji and Usopp. Honestly, for Sanji, I think it'll motivate him even more to go out and explore and get to the All Blue and get stronger himself. Usopp though is going to be interesting because on one hand, he's going to be happy that Zoro is strong enough to protect him, but also there's a chance that seeing this level of power so early on might just completely tank his confidence. Given his level of insecurity and doubt, I don't think it's impossible that Usopp starts to think about giving up. I think ultimately he will come around because Luffy and the rest of the crew will really talk to him and bring him back, but I do think this makes him go through his internal struggles a lot earlier. But reactions aside, let's get back to the actual fight, which after the feel out process, both of them are gonna elevate their powers, which I think means advanced conquers haki clashes will be coming. I think Mihawk definitely has it, even though it's not confirmed. The guy is practically king of all swordsmen right now, and as a swordsman, he relies on haki, so he's gonna need it, which also means they gotta move Baratie out the way or else it's gonna get sliced up. People are gonna get knocked out as well from Conqueror's Haki, and for a while it's gonna be a bit of a back and forth until Zoro gets pushed back enough to use Ashura. But even then, I think Mihawk is just gonna elevate to his final level to show that he has better haki. Because as right now, I think Zoro's still lacking a couple things. Number one, understanding his powers better. He had just kind of figured out Conqueror's Haki. So even though he could use advanced Conqueror's Haki, he's not quite at that sky splitting level yet, which I think Mihawk is. And then secondly, I think his haki can bloom even further to eventually get him a Black Blade, which once again Mihawk already has. So although I think given the difficulty of this fight, Zoro might grow in one of those things, I just don't think he's gonna grow enough in this fight to overcome Mihawk completely. That being said, I fully expect Mihawk to take a ton of damage in this fight because as we know, Zoro's endurance is crazy, and given the mentality he had at Baratie, he's gonna keep fighting fighting until he dies. Which is why it's kind of an interesting question of whether or not Zoro makes it out of this fight alive. Ultimately, I don't think Mihawk is gonna try to kill him because he didn't do that before, and even with those legendary duels with Shanks, him and Shanks are both just friends now. But at the same time, the fight is so difficult, he's gonna have to go all out with killing intent. In the end, I think because this is the One Piece universe, I think Zoro survives. He still ends up getting humbled, probably still has that crying moment where he declares to Luffy he never loses again. And honestly, I think an interesting question is, does he even still stay with the crew? Because at this point, he's recognized how strong he is and what the level he needs to get to is. The Straw Hats would not be giving him an adventure that's challenging enough. Once again, I think ultimately he does end up staying because of his loyalty, plus the fact that he can't navigate. But it is an interesting dilemma now that he's just so much stronger than the Straw Hats. Following that though, the East Blue is gonna be a bit of a breeze. Arlong is gonna get decked, Smoker's also gonna get decked. I think in his fight against Mihawk, his two regular swords are still gonna break, so he'll still end up getting the Sandai and Yubashiri at Locktown. But the interesting thing is, now that he's so strong, I don't think he's gonna end up losing Yubashiri, so Yubashiri is probably gonna be one of his final swords. Where things get a little more interesting though is once they enter the Grand Line and the story is of Mihawk versus Zoro starts to spread, because that means right off the bat the world government is not gonna take them lightly. So are the Straw Hats actually in trouble because how weak the rest of the crew is? And honestly, I think one thing that might end up happening here is that Zoro gets offered a warlord position just like Mihawk, and because of how weak the Straw Hats are earlier on, he might end up taking the position. Of course, that's gonna allow them a much easier time, but eventually it's gonna get complicated when Ace gets captured. But this is where I'm gonna stop the discussion because Marineford is a whole nother scenario we could do an entire video about. But for the time being, you could check out this video on what if Gear 5th Luffy was at Marineford.